What I'm hearing from Tory MPs on the ground is that like the whole party has been ambushed by this election. Even seats that had selected candidates, they weren't ready. CCHQ wasn't ready. Some of them were worrying that their official party mailing wouldn't be out before postal votes drop, which is actually a massive inflection point in the campaign. Others have told me that they're going to start ignoring CCHQ's demand to sign off on all their literature and to start putting whatever they like on it. Like, there's a real sense that the whole thing is just devolving into a series of isolated rearguard actions while MPs try, or candidates try, and fight their seat.
We're in a position where it's 3.5 weeks until polling day, and I think a lot of the country doesn't really know what to think of him at all because he's been so inconsistent.
So, Henry, do you see any way? I mean, Rachel makes the point now that we have heard of late the Prime Minister distancing himself from Liz Truss, and he did that before she came in with that budget. That's just on the record. And he walked away from Boris Johnson's cabinet, and now reminding us of that. Is there any room for more of the same? Would it do any good? Is there any way for Rishi Sunak at this point to try to turn around that perception of a cycle of failure?
Well, I think people did give him in his first year credit. You know, they allowed him that he had a hospital pass because Liz Truss had completely tanked the Conservatives' both economic and political position, and he had a lot of goodwill. And I think there was an opening, as Rachel was saying, at the start of his premiership, for him to go out bold on something, right? To say, I was the Chancellor who got us through the pandemic. I had to make hard decisions. I have to make hard decisions now. But he chose not to do that. And that hospital pass has expired, and he has played the hand he had badly. And I think that's why so many in the Conservative Party, especially since he ambushed them with the election, are so unwilling to give him the benefit of the doubt anymore. And ultimately, the Conservatives in one form or another have been in power for 14 years, and voters are struggling with the cost of living crisis, housing, childcare, and all of that. I don't think you can be re-elected on the basis of not being Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Like, it's an excellent starting point for being Prime Minister, but I really think the Conservative Party needs to have a better offer for the electorate than Rishi Sunak is neither of the last two people we sent to govern.
So if you're in the room now, I'm Rishi Sunak, I say, Henry, help me. What can I do? Is your answer, look, there's nothing, it's over, Prime Minister?
I mean, I wouldn't advise him that he could win the election, but I would have said before this, like, be bolder, as Rachel was saying. Just identify things, really targeted policies that will matter a lot to specific groups of voters that you're worried about losing. You know, things like cliff edges in the income tax and benefit system, you know, child benefit and so on. Like, just try to abolish those, right? Like, that's worth a lot of money to the voters it affects, who are ex-Tory voters or wavering Tory voters, and it costs a lot less overall than taking another penny off national insurance. Like, a ruthlessly targeted program of giveaways would have been my sort of hospital pitch.
And the other thing that would do is it would mean that Labour win the election. You've now got a starting point for winning those voters back, or for winning the conversation. You've got something to fall back on because you laid the groundwork in an election campaign that no one was expecting you to win. You can start from the point of view of, we were offering you this, and build it from there.
We warned you.
Yes. Whereas
Which
I
is
think
part of the plan now.
it is, but it's a bit haphazard, and it's sort of, if you look at this manifesto that read a lot like a budget, it was trying to offer a tiny amount to just about everyone, you know, working people, pensioners, parents, whatever, most of whom are going to vote Labour anyway, rather than offering something substantial to a core group who you could actually build something from afterwards. So I think the challenge is going to be, after this election, where do you begin the rebuilding? Where do you begin the Conservative recovery? And it's not clear from this manifesto where your starting point is going to be.
So look, now let's look at what's going on in this campaign. And when I say that now, I do not mean the latest opinion polls, as absorbed as we are by every one of those as they come along, or the latest speech by a leading player on either side of the argument. I'm thinking about what's actually going on out on the doorsteps, where people are campaigning door to door, street to street. Interesting reporting today that we're seeing the Conservative Party redirecting its forces into a very defensive operation to try to shore up their position in some of their strongest seats in the country. Well, Labour very much on the offensive now and taking their battle on the doorsteps into the deepest Conservative heartlands, seats that they would never have imagined they'd be in a place to win just a very short while a go. I mean, Henry Hill and Rachel Cunliffe. Henry, that's the stuff that tells you more about the real state of the race, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always been a big question is how do the Conservatives spend their resources? Because they should spend them defensively, especially against the Liberal Democrats, because in the long term, losing seats to Labour is bad, but Labour will be in government. Labour will eventually become unpopular. Those seats are regainable. What we saw before 2010 is that once the Lib Dems get in, unless they make the mistake of going into government and trying to change things, they can just dig in for decades and those seats will be lost. So it's very sensible. But there was always going to be pressure on the Prime Minister to fight the red wall. And I think that would have been a disaster if he'd actually done that, because those seats are gone.
Yeah.
And it would have meant all those resources are wasted.
That was realised, wasn't it, in sort of campaign battle headquarters a while ago?
It was, but they still were nominally committed to the 80-20 strategy, where they defend the 80 most at-risk seats and then they target 20 seats. And okay, maybe there's a handful of seats in Scotland they might pick up, but other than that, that was always absolutely deranged. But what I'm hearing from Tory MPs on the ground is that the whole party has been ambushed by this election. Even seats that had selected candidates, they weren't ready. CCHQ wasn't ready. Some of them were worrying that their official party mailing wouldn't be out before postal votes drop, which is actually a massive inflection point in the campaign. Others have told me that they're going to start ignoring CCHQ's demand to sign off on all their literature and to start putting whatever they like on it. There's a real sense that the whole thing is just devolving into a series of isolated rearguard actions while MPs or candidates try and fight their seat,
Yes.
rather than a coherent national campaign.
Yes. I mean, look, at the beginning of all of this, we were all shocked by the decision to call the election when it was called in the pouring rain. Subsequently, the word was out. This was actually being cooked up for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was in a fairly limited circle of a few dozen people. Is that true, or was it much narrower and much more haphazard than that in reality?
So the version that was leaked was that it took about 2 months to make the decision. And the one straw in the wind I think there is in support of that is that they took a lot of heat at the budget for not including defence. Now, as I see it, the reason to do that is because you're going to do a big defence drop in your autumn statement to ambush Labour with cash for the troops. And then instead, they kind of limped out the defence spending announcement less than 2 months later, which suggested to me that they didn't have another fiscal event planned. But on the other hand, I mean, I have not had it stood up, but I've heard from people involved that the decision was made a few days before.
Yeah.
Jeremy Hunt says he only heard a few days before. If Jeremy Hunt wasn't in the magic circle, who was in the magic circle?
You just don't believe the official account, do you?
I don't believe which is irritating because the official account is supported by evidence which I saw and wrote about. So it would be in some ways better for me if the official account were true. But no, Jeremy Hunt's told Conhome, I think we've got this piece coming out tomorrow or the day after, that we went canvassing with him and we asked him, when did you find out about the general election? And he said, before the country. And he's like, how long before? And it was a few days before. Yeah. And if the Chancellor, who is very close to the Prime Minister politically, only found out about the election a few days before, very few other people can possibly have known about it.
And I think part of the story is that the Chief Whip only found out at the last moment. Now, that's another weird one, isn't it?
Yeah, all of it. He's ambushed his own party. CCHQ didn't know. The people he's paid and hired to run the campaign didn't know, which means that they haven't, I mean, you can tell from the state of their social media, they had not planned a grid out. They had not A/B tested all of their sort of messages and items. Everyone was caught off guard by this. The party hadn't selected 100 candidates. I think sometimes when we talk about, the Prime Minister's decision, there's the impression that the Conservative Party was secretly arming and getting ready, and then it sprang this trap.
Yeah,
it's
nothing of the sort.
No, it's just Rishi Sunak just stood up and went, we're going to the polls now. And the Conservative Party, most of which had assumed if he didn't go in May that he'd go in October, was just like, what? And scrambling to put the pieces
together. And you're
together.
still getting plenty of anger about that from the campaign out in the country.
Yeah, people are hugely angry, right? And this is what I was saying about the candidates. Candidates feel unsupported by CCHQ. They don't think the centre is giving the centre. They're doing their best. Activists are knocking on doors, trying to fight for their local candidate. And what do they get from the centre? They get odd policies that no one has told them about. They don't have lines to take on national service, right? No one had warned them it was coming. Then they had D-Day. And so, as I said, I've had candidates tell me, look, CCHQ is being a control freak and insisting he sees all of our literature, and I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Really, really fascinating. Rachel, let's look at on the Labour side. So we see, it seems, that Labour is fighting in what would be bandit country. It reminds you of 1997, when the results came in 1997. in Labour headquarters and saying, well, where's that then? I've never heard of that place. Now apparently it's a Labour seat, and you're hearing the same sort of thing.
Well, I think Labour have been told to not bother with their resources in seats where the Conservative majority is less than 3,000 because they're a given, and they're focusing in ones where the majorities are 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, and are getting a warmer reception than they would have expected. I was speaking to one candidate who she was an activist in 2019. Now she's a candidate, and the response she's getting on the doorstep in a very traditionally conservative area now versus the reaction that she got sort of 5 years ago when people were slamming doors in her face, effectively not, she didn't quite say spitting on her, but really sort of not wanting to know. Now it's a much warmer reception. I won't say in what part of the country that is, but I think in most Conservative strongholds there are significant worries. The irony is, as Henry sort of mentioned in his passing comment, is that probably the safest place to be a Conservative MP at the moment is Scotland, where the main opposition is the SNP that are having their own issues, and so some of the safest Conservative seats are the ones up there. But that's not really something that you can build a national campaign around. The one Conservative message that I have heard is resonating, and it's interesting because Rishi Sunak actually alluded to it in the manifesto launch today, is the defensive one, the don't hand Labour a blank cheque. This idea that, look, we know you don't want us in government, we know we're not going to be in government, but just give us your vote so that Keir Starmer has a normal-sized majority rather than a super majority, and you've seen that in the adverts that they're running online, which I think is a logical strategy, but tells you something about where the energy is. I think when it comes to the election campaign timing, there was hope in Sunak's team that by going unexpectedly, he would catch Labour off guard and also catch Reform off guard, who are having even more problems fielding and vetting all their candidates than the Conservatives are. We've had some stories about that already. Sort of an idea, let's go now and catch Nigel Farage off guard. But if that was the thinking, yes, Reform has been caught off guard. That doesn't seem to have hurt them particularly. So that has backfired too, and Labour seem in a much stronger position with their candidate selection than the Tories do.
Just on the doorsteps, I saw this, fairly hilarious report today. I forget where I saw it, so forgive the lack of attribution, but it was about canvassers hating the fact that so many people have got doorbell cameras now. Did you see that? It's in the Sun, and the Sun are reporting that canvassers are really hacked off at so many doorbell cameras, because it means people can see you're a canvasser or an MP and just not come to the door. They can say, "Oh, I'm not talking to you." That's the last conversation I want to have.
I'm the opposite. I have never been canvassed in a general election. I clearly am in very safe. I've been in very safe seats, Labour seats in North London. No one has ever bothered. I would love someone of any party to turn up at my door and actually ask for my vote and have the conversation with me. But it hasn't happened yet.
In one sense, you would be a canvasser's nightmare.
I know,
because they don't want to have long conversations.
They'd never get away.
They just want to know: are you with us? Are you against us? If you're with us, we know where to come and get your vote out. It's not like it's like Jehovah's Witnesses stopping you in the street. They don't expect to be engaged in long theological conversations. Outside Marks and Spencer.
I mean, they'd get that in our household.
They'd get that in your household
as well.
We won't broadcast your address, so the canvassers know to avoid that one. What are you picking up, Henry, from Tory canvassers out there? I don't mean front benchers. Forget the opinion polls. What are you hearing is coming over on those doors? When people come to the door, they haven't got a doorstep camera, and they do answer the door. What do they say?
I think the message, obviously in different parts of the country, there's lots of local concerns, and so that muddies it. But I suppose the consistent message is, and maybe this is Tory canvassers looking for something to cling to, is that there are a lot of people who are genuinely just not very enthusiastic about Labour,
right,
who aren't also unenthusiastic about the government, it has to be said, and are therefore sort of leaning towards it's better to have a change than not a change. And that's a very hard thing for the government to fight. But I think that the hope is that there's a big chunk of voters who feel that way, the undecideds.
Yes.
And that if the Conservatives target them ruthlessly, maybe with that don't give Labour too big a majority message, maybe with the £2,000 tax bill, whatever it is, that you can move some of them back, because there's this sense that the reason Labour is so far ahead is not because of any vast enthusiasm for the Labour offer, because it is quite thin in policy terms, or at least it was until a couple of weeks ago, but it's because there's a sick to death of the chaos of the last couple of years. I don't know if that's a massively hopeful prospectus for Conservatives, but the hope is that if you've got a good local candidate, you've got a candidate with a track record, name recognition, then maybe they can get those undecided voters to be like, well, I don't like the Tories nationally, I don't like the government very much, but it looks like Starmer's going to win, and I like my local MP, so I'll turn out for them. That's what I'm getting from some, even in the red wall, although I think that's probably for the birds. But in so-called blue wall seats in the home counties around London, that's the angle that they're sort of playing up. Is look, it's not really about choosing the government when it's a 20-point gap. It's about, do you think this candidate or this MP has done a good job for our area?
Yeah.
And they're taking the Conservative messaging off the leaflets, or very small. I've seen places where the leaflets for the Conservative MP, they're green, because green's a nice, happy colour that suggests sort of protecting the environment and community spirit, and it'll say in the tiny corner Conservative, but with their name in big letters.
This is a return to good old-fashioned British politics. Before the homogenising effects of television, there were random bits of the country where the Tory colour was red. Like brilliant. Bring it on.
There was lots of that in the local election campaign, of Conservative campaigners in particular putting the word Conservative in microscopic lettering at the bottom of a...
Andy
of a
Street
leaflet.
did it.
Andy Street, he barely mentioned it, didn't he?
In the
I
leaflet.
think it has to be there by
Purple and
law
green
somewhere,
colours.
but it can be very small.
Yeah.